Hi, this is Red to York. This is a presentation on effective personnel administration, Module 3 of the Management Fundamentals series. At the completion of this module, you will be able to, sorry about that craziness. I just had to do it for some reason. Okay, create a job announcement that complies with requirements of the Equal Employment Opportunity Act and affirmative action. Identify the proper role of standardized tests for job applicant screening. Identify the questions to ask and the questions to avoid in a job interview. Improve your agency's employees' performance evaluation. And describe how a termination of employment process should be conducted. You might want to hit the pause button here and just reflect on these for a moment or two to see where we're going and then come back to me. An overview. First of all, human resource administration deals with all aspects of the employee's life in the agency, from recruitment to termination, including all of these 7 different things: job design, benefits, performance evaluation, staff development, recruiting, salary, and firing if necessary. So you can see that this means that personnel administration deals with all aspects, from the time you enter the job until the time you leave the job. Let's talk about screening of applicants for the job. To meet affirmative action requirements, the job announcement must have each of these things. Hit the pause button, look them over, and ask yourself the question, why should they be in the job announcement? And then come back to me. Well, the reason they should be there, of course, is to provide equal access to the job from persons of different kinds and places and ethnicities and so forth. They should all have equal access to the information they need to know whether this is a job that will fit them or not. Let's talk about standardized tests as a way of screening and hiring employees who've applied for a job with your organization. Have standardized tests generally been found to be clearly a predictor of job performance? Not clearly. It's a little bit weak, rather weak in that regard. Are standardized tests better at narrowing the field of applicants to a dozen or so, or better at finding the one person for the job? It's the former, not the latter. In other words, it can be useful for narrowing the field of applicants because you'll eliminate some people who clearly would not qualify because they don't have the skills you need or the knowledge you need or the ability you need. But they're not so good at finding the one person for the job. Once you've narrowed your field down to a number of persons you would like to interview, then you should put the standardized test idea behind you and move on from there. Let's talk about the job interviews. Should the interview be just one person or a combination of people with different backgrounds in your agency, that is to say? I would say it should be a combination of people. I know from my own experience as an administrator that I've been on the verge of making mistakes in hiring decisions until I heard from various people who had been involved in the process. They picked up some things I didn't. So the more the merrier, you might say, when it comes to getting people involved in providing information about who would be the best person for the job when they're being interviewed. Should the interviewer take phone calls in the interview? Of course not. Should there be a certain amount of uniformity in the interviews from one applicant to another? Yes. Doesn't mean it has to be absolutely identical in every single way, but generally speaking, it should be identical. You should have a level playing field for various people who are applying for the job. Who should do most of the talking in the job interview? The person doing the interviewing or the person being interviewed? Well, it should be the person being interviewed. You want, as the interviewer, you want to be a good listener. learn what you can find out. Let's talk about a few things about what you should ask in the job interview. Should you use broad questions soliciting their self-perceptions about their abilities, or practice scenarios that reflect the work of the job? So you've got two options here being posed. What do you think is better? I would suggest that practice scenarios would be better because it gives you a better idea of what a person is likely to do in the job. Should you ask about family circumstances like marital status, having children, etc.? The answer is no. These kinds of things do not usually relate to the job a person is doing. So if the person wants to volunteer information about that, that's fine, but you should not ask these specific kinds of questions. Do you ask about nationality, religion, or whether they have a disability? The answer again is no. That's not something directly related to the job. What about legal issues? Can you ask, have you ever been arrested? Answer is no. A person could have been arrested but not convicted. So they shouldn't be punished for having been perhaps in the wrong place at the wrong time. Can you ask, have you ever been convicted of a crime? The answer there is yes. You can ask if they have been convicted. Let's look at the idea of checking references. Should you check references? Of course, you should check references. Should you rely mostly upon written references or written reference letters for the applicant to do a phone interview of the person who is giving the reference? I would say the phone interview is better. You'll get more information there. A person talking to you over the phone is more likely to give you information of a negative sort than you're likely to find in a written letter. Can you use race as a basis for selecting people? Here's one example from a Supreme Court decision. Can you use a quota system for admissions in college by reserving a certain number of admission slots for minority persons? The answer is no. There's a famous Supreme Court decision that said that that was not constitutional because you're reserving a particular admission slot for a person based just on race. That's not constitutional according to the Supreme Court. Can you give race a number of points in the rating of an applicant? That's generally not allowed also. You can consider things, well, here's another question. Can you consider one's interest as a criterion for admission? Yes, you can. And you can have diversity, the importance of diversity in your personnel um, pool as one of the goals you're pursuing, but you have to be not terribly specific in regard to such things as using quotas or giving a person a specific amount of advantage because of their race. There's the Americans with Disabilities Act that was enacted in 1990. Uh, it's a measure more of equal employment opportunity than affirmative action, I would say. The Act says that employers must make reasonable accommodations of disabilities. However, what is meant by reasonable accommodation is not easy to determine. If I'm a person who is an employee and I want to assert some kind of accommodation because of my disability, I don't get to decide whether I qualify just all by myself or what the accommodation should be. It should be what would be considered a reasonable accommodation. Not something terribly easy to define, but that's what the Act suggests. Let's talk a little bit about salary. Is salary normally used as a good reinforcement of good performance in the job? I would say no, because we usually don't have very much in the way of salary to serve as a benefit. There's not much of an incentive for you to work harder and so forth because of the pay raise you may get, because the pay raise is likely to be relatively small from year to year in human services. Let's look at measuring work performance. Let's look at a couple of different, I'm going to put them all up here together. 3 different options that you may use for measuring performance. One would be general rating scales, like completing reports on time and so forth, with ratings like excellent, good, fair, and poor. That's not a great system, in my opinion. Management by objectives is better. This specifies with more clarity what is expected. Behaviorally anchored rating scales is good, I think. That's where statements like excellent, excellent or poor, are given specific descriptors of precisely what that means in this particular context. I think that can be useful too. Should written performance evaluations err on the side of being positive? Well, I'd say they should be honest. Uh, if honest is mostly positive, that's fine. Should they be exclusively positive? Well, probably not, unless the person is exclusively positive. But you're putting yourself in a problem if you um, get really positive and such, because if this person later has a problem, you don't want to have all your performance evaluations saying they were just fine, fine, fine for previous years. Should an evaluation be a surprise? No. The employee who, if they're having some difficulty, they should be notified by you as their organizational superior before you get to the time when you're doing a written performance evaluations after 6 months or a year or whatever. Let's talk about termination. Termination or firing can be for cause, like a legal issue, or unsatisfactory job performance. The latter is the more difficult because it's more nebulous. For job performance, it's important that this action be backed up with performance feedback and opportunity for corrective action. If you failed as the agency in either of these, in regard to performance feedback or opportunity for correction, and the person being fired wants to appeal, they have a case to be made there. What about the termination interview? Let's talk about it in terms of it should be at the right time and place. Sometimes it's given on Fridays because you've got a weekend to cool off. Carefully prepare for it. Begin with a clear statement of purpose. Um, Clearly and factually state the action being taken. Do not negotiate. This is not a negotiation. Person may say, well, what if I do this better? Will you let me have another month or something? It's not a negotiation point. Provide information on their option for appealing. Let colleagues offer support. This is not something you can do as the person doing the firing. Don't even go there. Let their colleagues offer them support and say, oh, I'm sorry for you, and so forth. I'd suggest you just don't go there. Just let them know what's going on. Okay, that is the end of my presentation on personal administration. I hope this is helpful.